Okay, folks, I think we're going to get started here. I want to thank everybody for coming. You guys are here because you care about this stuff. And I'll tell you, well, first of all, my name is Patrick Berry. I'm the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife. And I talk to my counterparts around the country, and they can't get people to come to meetings like this. And so while we often discuss this stuff, and people are very passionate, and sometimes we disagree, I can tell you one thing: the department feels very lucky that we get folks to show up, and we feel very blessed that people care enough about this to come and help us out a little bit. Before I get started, I just want to make sure I introduce some folks here and explain a few things. Normally when we have these hearings, we're looking for input from folks. And that usually happens in March when we're here now. And every year then, we go through a process, once we get our data back, which we'll go through here shortly, about how tough the winter was and how the harvest was, and we'll propose an antlerless regulation for the year. And then the Fish and Wildlife Board will look at that separately. The reason I mention that is that what we're doing this year is because folks take the time to show up, is that we've incorporated some of those board members here into this hearing tonight. Now, the Fish and Wildlife Board, for those of you that may not know, is a completely separate entity from the department. These folks set the regulations for fishing and hunting seasons, and some of them they have to review every year, like deer season, moose season, that sort of thing. They're appointed by the governor on 6-year terms, and some of them have been there a long time. There's one that represents each county. And tonight I just want to introduce 3 of the board members that took the time to come from around the state, although one of them's pretty close. Some of you may know Justin Lindholm in the middle here. He's a representative from Rutland County, very recently appointed. Brian Ames right here is actually the chair of the Fish and Wildlife Board, and he comes from down south in Windham County. And Ron Wilcox is a representative from Bennington County. Tonight there's a hearing in Montpelier, and there'll be some board members there as well. So the value of having these folks here tonight is that not only do the department folks get to hear from everybody here, but the board that ultimately sets the regulations gets to do that too, and it's better use of your time, quite frankly, in the end. For department staff here tonight, I just want to make sure everybody knows who's here in case you have questions at some point. I want to thank Lieutenant Don Isabel, Game Warden, works out of the Rutland District. Joel Flewelling, one of our Rutland biologists. Scott Darling, who'll be walking you through all the information you see here tonight. Jason Morin, who actually works right here at Kehoe, who keeps everything running smoothly. And I know most folks here are very supportive of the conservation camp, and we thank Jason for that. Rob Sterling, you may know, he's a local game warden here. Kim Royer, Deputy Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife. And who else did I miss anybody else here?
Let's see, Alyssa Bennett?
Well, we'll get to you. Alyssa Bennett is in the back right there. Raise her hand right there. Now, importantly, we've been looking for a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. We haven't had a deer project leader for a year. We launched 3 national searches looking for folks, and I guess they were all a little bit scared. But finally, we got a great person who came on board, Adam Murkowski. Adam, if you could stand up here, our new deer project leader. And at some point here we'll have Adam say a few words, but I think that you'll enjoy chatting with him, both personally and professionally. He lives, eats, breathes, and sleeps white-tailed deer, and we're really excited to have some young folks come in the department. He's one of them, and we're really looking forward to working with him. This is his first day on the job, okay? Remember that, and we want to keep him here, all right? Also, tonight, one thing we did last year, which was great for folks that can't make it to the hearing, Vermont Public Television is going to be streaming this live. So that means you're all on TV at some point or another. And we posted last year's hearing on YouTube, which has gotten a lot of great traffic. And you can go back and take a look at some of the information that we're going to put out there tonight. So just to remind everybody that you'll be a star for the time that if you have something to say. The goal of the meeting tonight is to try to, and Scott and I know we'll go through this, share some information about what happened during this past season and look ahead a little bit. Our job is to try to help give you the information that we have as a department from a biological perspective and to listen and get some feedback. So with that, let me pass it off to Scott Darling. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight. Scott?
You good? Thank you very much, Commissioner. Before we start, again, thank you all for coming, and I appreciate those of you who are listening online. Maybe before I start going through this, I would like to give Adam an opportunity to give a brief description of his history, who he is, where he's from, etc. As the Commissioner said, this is his first day on the job, so he got to work all day and then continue to work all night, just the way we told him it has to be every day. And so, Adam, would you come on up, please?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to thank Commissioner Barry and Scott for the warm welcome, and I'm truly humbled to be a part of a team that's shown the passion and dedication and breadth of knowledge that these people I've met over the last few days have, and the people of Vermont are truly lucky to have them working on their behalf. With that in mind, I want to thank everyone I met before the meeting. I was truly pleased by the positive reception. I look forward to continuing that type of dialogue in the future so we can work together to continue making deer hunting and the deer hunting culture in the state what it needs to be for future generations. I also like to take this opportunity to tell you guys a little bit about myself and what led me to here today. Passionate deer hunter. I thank my father for that. Growing up, I itched to go deer hunting. And I was very fortunate to go to a college where they had a long-standing deer project. And within my first semester of college, I was out trapping deer. And that was the neatest thing in the world to me. And it led to a lot of opportunities, working with the Wisconsin DNR on their population model, looking at ways to improve it when it was audited by some national experts. It led to opportunities in Colorado, doing fawn studies, looking at the influence of oil production on mule deer populations. Led to my grad work in Arkansas, doing deer research on the Mississippi River. And I just darted a deer Thursday night before I came up here on Fort Bragg. So I feel blessed and fortunate to have those types of experiences, and I'm glad I can bring that cumulative knowledge to improve the situation here in Vermont and work together to continue doing what makes myself and you all so passionate about the outdoors. And again, I want to thank everyone for the warm reception. And I'd encourage everyone I didn't speak to remain after the meeting so I can hear your thoughts and opinions on deer hunting in this state. So thank you very much.
I think I'll just close with, I was so impressed that when we informed Adam that we were offering him the job, he really wanted to figure out a way that he could get to Vermont and start on March 26th, because that was the first deer meeting for the state. So he's going to be here tonight, he's here tonight, and he's going to be in Orleans Wednesday night as well, listening to Vermont hunters. So thanks a lot, Adam. So what we will do is basically run through very similar information to what has been done in the past. We'll give you an overview of quickly some of the other big game species. This year we did add one-pagers of the bear, turkey, moose, big game season, so you can read a little bit about that as well. Then we'll go through the summary of last year's deer season, the winter severity, some issues to look forward to in the future that you need to keep your radars on, and at that point then we'll open it up for questions, comments about all of the above. So if I could, let's see, I think I can figure these lights. Last year, in 2011, we harvested 5,231 wild turkeys. For those that hunted, you'll notice that the fall harvest was extremely low last year. As a matter of fact, it was 2/3 of what it was the year before, and in part of that was because of the tremendous beech mast production that we had last year in the state of Vermont. This graph here shows our data that we collect from doing beech nut plots across the state. The biologists do that every year, and you can see that last year literally was the 3rd highest beech nut production in the 24 years that we've been doing that survey. And that had an awful lot to do with animal behavior and where animals were located last fall, from turkeys to black bear and even to white-tailed deer. Our black bear harvest was 396 bears, which was down about 20% from the year before. And the food supplies had an awful lot to do that. Those bears were higher up in elevation, feeding on beech nuts, not necessarily available to most of the hunters. Our bear population now is somewhere around 6,000 animals, and we are trying to take initiatives to slow the growth of that bear population down. Last year was an amazing year for moose, and it was the first archery season for moose in the state of Vermont. And we had 50 permit holders that harvested 16 moose in the archery season, which was 30% success rate, pretty much exactly what we had predicted. The regular moose season, we had 236 animals taken, but we had a tremendous reduction in the number of moose permits across the state, down to 405 permits last year. And that was in response to finally beginning to have decreases down in the moose population in the northeastern part of the state, where our goals were to reduce moose densities there. Across the state, in all deer seasons, we harvested 12,132 deer. And a great proportion of that reduction in the total deer harvest was because antlerless permit numbers were down 63% from the year before. But if you look just at our buck harvest for last year was down 13%. For those that may have read about our concerns about last winter, we were predicting pretty much a 10% drop in populations of our white-tailed deer from 2010 to 2011. The 2011 deer season, as shown in this map, really from archery to youth to regular to muzzleloader season, you'll see that in the brown shaded areas were areas that were closed to antlerless hunting during the muzzleloader season. The area shown in green E was closed to antlerless hunting for both archery and muzzleloader, and those areas shaded in a lighter gray were open to muzzleloader hunting for antlerless deer with those permit numbers as shown. When you look at the harvest, the percentage of the harvest by season, the big difference between this year and previous years is the muzzleloader harvest was down significantly simply because of the reduction in antlerless permits that were available. So for example, in 2010, the proportion of the muzzleloader harvest, of the deer harvest that was from muzzleloader was 27%. And this year it was down to 17%, simply because of the reduction in permits. When you look at the age and sex distribution of our harvest, again, those numbers were generally pretty similar. Because of the reduction in antlerless harvest, actually, the bucks made a greater proportion of our overall deer harvest last year than in previous years. When you look specifically at the archery season, the percentages are pretty consistent from year to year. And these numbers don't change an awful lot. We did harvest a little over 2,600 deer during that season, but the breakdown by sex and age was comparable to what it typically is. That archery season generally has gotten to be relatively consistent. And next was a youth season, which is very important to us from a biological data perspective. Because when we began the antler point restriction in 2005, as you may remember, that precluded us from going out and having biological check stations during the opening weekend of rifle season, because simply the spike yearlings were not going to be brought in for us to weigh and measure their antlers. And so we shifted over collecting biological data to the youth season weekend. And it's very helpful for two reasons. One, for the most part, for many of these youths, a deer is a deer, and they'll bring it in perhaps in proportion to what it exists in the population, and more importantly, they're allowed to shoot that spike yearling buck, which can be brought in, that we can include in our data set. And so that enables us to keep a very full picture of the health and the proportion of those yearling bucks in our population. And the last season to go over was the 2011 muzzleloader season. Again, what's interesting is this, the proportions aren't all that different, but the number of bucks that were harvested during the muzzleloader season last year were greater than they were in 2010, which is very different than the rifle season, where we did have that reduction of 12%, I think, in our buck harvest. And everyone's always interested in how many successful hunters harvested 2, perhaps 3 deer. And these numbers are very consistent from year to year. And Adam even suggested to me today that these numbers are generally pretty consistent with what it is in other states where they have multiple bag limits. Of our 10,388 hunters who were deer hunters who were successful last year, basically 88% of them only harvested 1 deer. You had 10% that harvested 2, and only 2%, or 495 people, ended up shooting 3 deer during the season. Some of you perhaps have been involved in the years past of participating in our deer hunter surveys during the rifle season, where we ask hunters to record where they hunt, the number of hours they hunt, and the number of deer that they see. This is very, very important information for us because it really gives us an index of how much effort you need to put in to see deer in the state. And when you look at this on a daily basis through the rifle season, you could see what's very interesting is in the first 2 days there on number 1 and 2, which is the Saturday and Sunday of the opening weekend of rifle season, you actually harvest more deer than the amount of effort you put in. And in other words, basically, the deer are more plentiful, and it's very efficient to be out there opening weekend being able to hunt deer. But after that, some of those deer have wised up, and you've already taken some of those less wary deer out of the population. From that point on, you have to put in more effort to harvest those deer. In our previous deer biologist, Sean Haskell, used to say, once you get into the second week and you see how much effort you have to put in to kill a deer, you might be better off moving to some other place where those deer necessarily haven't been chased so much, maybe further back in the mountains and the woods. But this is a great example of what that opening weekend means for deer hunter success. This is a crazy slide, but I want to show you that that information that we get about the hunters and how long they have to spend to see deer, the key thing is we keep track of all of this by Wildlife Management Unit over all these years. But there's some of the key indices from this year is, if you'll notice, this is a statewide total. In 2010, it was 2.22 hours or deer seen for every 10 hours you put in hunting. This past year, it was 1.76 deer for every 10 hours you put in hunting. So if you just put in 10 hours of hunting, this year you saw fewer deer than they did the year before. But what is interesting, if you look back at these numbers over time, you'll notice that we have these dips in 2004 and these dips, particularly 2004, where the sighting reports go down, but they can really jump up the following year. We went from 1.75 to 2.75. And I think conditions like this winter will really help get that effort, that deer sighting rate up. I will say one other thing, that on the average, hunters this year in Vermont hunted 3 hours more than they did the previous year. And I think that really is just acknowledgement on your part that it was harder to get a deer this year. You guys worked harder to try to get those deer. This slide basically shows the permits, antlerless permits by Wildlife Management Unit. Those areas with an X did not have permits available to them. The big numbers, we generally do track each Wildlife Management Unit and the success rate of the hunters there. What is very interesting as I looked at these numbers over the past week is that our antlerless permit holder success rate actually went up last year. It was 15.5% in 2010 and 16.5% statewide in 2011. And it may be a function of weather conditions between 2010 and 2011, or maybe a function, again, of people recognizing they had to work a little harder, and they did, to be successful. This graph shows several key things. One, it's basically the yellow bars is the total deer harvest over time since 1994. And you can see our harvests in the 1990s were very high overall. Frankly, there were concerns about the density of deer in Vermont at that time, and it looks like we were not able to sustain those populations and really began to fall quickly in the early 2000s. And then with the onset of the antler point restriction in 2005, we've slowly begun to increase up until these last few years, where our total deer harvest has been going down. The same the pattern is pretty similar for bucks, although you have to recognize that in something like 2011, a lot of this reduction in total deer harvest was designed simply because of the reduction in antlers permit numbers. And that's where maybe tracking buck kill may be more indicative of what's happening out there. This is getting to be a pretty amazing slide over time. As you know, we have several stations around the state that collect winter severity index data. And what they do is whenever the temperature is at or below zero, or the snow depth is 18 inches or more on the ground, a point is given on that for that particular day. From December 1st to April 15th, this data is collected. It's almost interesting to know, and I guess us Vermonters know it, there really never seems to be an average winter. It's either more severe or less severe. But you can see from this that really 4 of the previous 5 winters have been more severe than average, with these 2 anomalies, 2010 and now in 2012. And what is simply, we've all lived through this winter, and we've really experienced what appears to be the lightest winter since we've been collecting data, been looking at this winter severity data well into the early 1970s. And while our statewide average may be somewhere around 50 points of 0 degrees or 18 inches of snow or more, we're probably going to end up somewhere around 7 or 8 points for this past winter. It's probably no surprise to anyone, but at the same time, it is amazing how mild that winter has been and the potential for that deer herd to respond to it. We continue to monitor the health of our deer herd. This is a graph of the yearling, year-and-a-half antler beam diameter, which is basically the width of the beam on the antler. And our yearling males are the ones that tell us most about the balance of the deer population with the carrying capacity of the habitat. They're the ones that are most sensitive to it, as opposed to 2, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. And what you'll see is we've really have had a concern that we've had a reduction in our antler beam diameter, and then we did have this spike here last year, or in 2010, that we perhaps considered to be because of the mild winter. And then you can see it dropped right back down. But it still is above 16 millimeters. And 16 millimeters in our mind is a nice threshold where if we can keep yearling antler beam diameters at or above that level, we're comfortable that the herd's in balance and the deer are healthy. You get down into some of these lower beam diameters here, and then you begin to affect your healthier herd, the productivity, the number of fawns that are dropped on the ground, etc. But we will, and particularly Adam, will be really looking at this data hard to see what in fact is happening. Is there a reason for this reduction in the antler beam diameter? Was it winter, or is it something else? And the same holds true for the weights of our yearling bucks. As you can see, from the 40s and 50s and 60s, those weights were really down on our yearlings, and then began to climb rapidly in the 1980s and have continued to do so, amazingly, even just dropping slightly over the past year after that hard winter. So the weights of our yearling bucks seem to be doing very well, but the beam diameters may not. And we're trying, Adam's job is going to be to try to figure out what is actually going on out there that has those two different indices going in perhaps a different direction. This is a slide of looking at imagery of snow depth on the ground in Vermont throughout the winter of 2012. The red here shows anywhere from 2 to 12 inches of snow on the ground on January 1st, and then in February you'll see people started getting a little more than a foot, 1 to 2 feet on the ground, and in March 1st you basically had a very similar situation. And so generally, again, if you're looking for that 18 inches of snow as a threshold for deer, much of the state, they really didn't have to worry much about that. This is what's pretty amazing. The one on the left is a photograph, an image of March 19th in 2011, and you can see nearly all of Vermont, except for just the very Champlain Valley, was full of 2 to 3 feet of snow on the ground. And in March 19th of 2012, literally there were just spots in Vermont that had a few inches on the ground. Big, big difference for a deer who's carrying fetuses at that time of year, who's trying to get their health back in shape for the spring. So some of the topics that we wanted to make you aware of that we want to continue to keep on your radar range from monitoring disease, chronic wasting disease. There's a deer damage to forest regeneration issue that I think we need to discuss. Antler point restriction, the wildlife management unit realignment that is being considered, and some potential season changes that are being discussed, particularly at the board level. So on the diseases of concern, we continue in Vermont to be chronic wasting disease, CWD free. That is about as good news as you could have about a deer herd. And we are very adamant and working very hard to make sure we stay CWD free. Because if and when it enters the state, there's some significant implications for the management actions that we need to take to get rid of it. We need to act fast and we need to act deliberative. Currently, several states, Maryland, I believe, West Virginia, they have chronic wasting disease. New York did have it, and they have acted very swiftly and really have kind of taken care of that very well in that state. The deer damage to forest regeneration issue is one that really started, has been around for a while, and it really came up significantly even at the legislative session last winter, not this year, but last winter. And the issue is the legislature set up a committee to deal with this issue, a working group that the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife was basically the lead person on. And I suspect that many sportsmen sit there and go, "You're kidding me, I had an awful tough time finding some deer to kill last year, and now you're telling me that there's so many deer that there's eating everybody's forest regeneration." But there is some interesting data to suggest why there may be some problems, and it's a very complex problem that working committee worked on and tried to address. But there's some very basic habitat issues that are not working in the favor of the conflict between deer and forest regeneration. And I think this graph here really demonstrates this is the amount of the thousands of acres of forest land in Vermont that is in 3 different stand timber size classes, okay? Saw timber in the blue, pole timber in the red, and seedling sapling in the white. We all know that good deer habitat includes a large proportion of seedling sapling habitat. And as you can see, this data going back from, I think it's 1948, shows this dramatic increase in seedling sapling habitat available to deer in the 60s, and it's been going down ever since. And you look at the line for saw timber, and you can see our forests growing older and the trees getting larger. Certainly from a deer habitat potential, this is not the trend you'd like to see, but it is one perhaps that is putting more and more deer browsing pressure on whatever is coming in the understory. And so it's a very complicated issue, but there's a fine line between managing a deer herd for hunter satisfaction and managing a deer herd for forest landowner and forester satisfaction. When you look at that data, and there's 2010 data that we've been looking at recently, what is interesting is when you take a look at your seedling sapling, your small diameter habitat by county, and unfortunately there is no data here in this 2010 for Bennington, but you'll see that Caledonia, Chittenden, Essex County, Orleans County, those all have some 10 to 14%. Caledonia has 17% of the forest area is in this small diameter class. And then for us down here in southern Vermont, Rutland, Windham, Windsor County, you're looking at 4, 5, and 6% of the habitat base being in the seedling sapling stand size class, okay? Very hard to have a really productive deer habitat when you have such low proportions of that preferred habitat type. But very quickly, there is a legislative report that you can find on our website, and I encourage you to go to it. The committee worked very hard and came up with, I think, 5 primary recommendations. One is that we need to work with foresters to monitor browse conditions, to try to better evaluate what's happening on the ground out there. Our sites, are there concentrations where deer populations are high enough that browse is being over-browsed? Secondly, we need to inform landowners and hunters on the need to manage deer populations. I think most of you will probably have heard this again and again, but a lot of forest landowners may not really make that connection between what's happening on their forest and their ability, one's ability to manage the deer population on their lands. A third recommendation was to consider revising the current use program to offer a financial incentive for an enrollee to keep their lands open to hunting. As you know, you can participate in that program and still have your lands posted. But one way that we think we maybe be able to focus in on areas where there's heavy deer browsing is by creating some incentive to have those lands open for people to hunt and manage that deer population. The fourth one is deer populations should be managed through existing regulated hunting seasons, not necessarily through some other means of allowing landowners to take deer that may be doing damage to forest regeneration. That the tools exist through our hunting seasons in Vermont to do that, and we should try to use those as much as possible. And fifth, this year there will be an online program on the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department website to link hunters and forest landowners. So forest landowners who feel that they have a deer population problem can enroll online, and then we'll have hunters enrolling online, and hopefully we'll be able to match up hunters with landowners to get onto these lands that perhaps either have overabundant deer populations, or maybe they haven't been hunted or posted, whatever, that we want to be able to link those people so that we can get deer populations managed there. So a very important issue. I encourage you to take a look at that. The antler point restriction issue, as we've said for probably 2 years now, it's a very big issue. We started 2005 with essentially a 5-year experimental program. We need to evaluate the results of that, and this is going to be one of Adam's primary jobs in the next 12 months, is to take a look at this. There are some concerns, or have been some concerns about the number, the proportion of yearlings that are spike horns, that we've seen an increase in that since we started the antler point restriction. And we're also beginning to see, we've seen that slightly in our 2-year-old, 2.5-year-olds and older. and we need to make some sense of this data. And all I can say is Adam's fully aware this is a high priority for us, and that we are committed to engaging the Vermont hunting community in helping us evaluate the success or the failure of that antler point restriction. Almost done. There is a proposal that we need to go to legislature with to refine some of our wildlife management units. It's very simple. The intent here is to try to develop more of these Connecticut River Valley wildlife management units so that we can manage those deer densities, which tend to be higher than in some of the foothill regions. K1, K2, under this proposal here, are to be absorbed into one K unit. K1 is just simply too small for the data to be meaningful, and so our proposal is to combine them back the way we used to with just K. And lastly, the Fish and Wildlife Board has a petition before it to consider the legalization of crossbows for the archery season. And the board was given a presentation by the department on many of the issues surrounding crossbows and the list of potential issues. Maybe there's age limits or season limits, or is it unlimited participation, or do we pick on certain people of certain ages, etc. I encourage you to stay engaged in that, particularly engage with the board on that. And Brian, I don't know if there's a particular month where you'll be taking that up again.
July, I believe.
In July, perhaps, the Fish and Wildlife Board will be taking that issue up once more. So lastly, reminder, we do manage our deer populations on a regional basis. We try to link up all of the mountains regions of wildlife management units, I should say, because they have so much in common. Down here, the eastern foothills, the western foothills. And when we take a look at deer densities by that area, we estimated in the pre-hunt deer densities in 2011 for, say, the foothills. You can see the two lines here show our target for deer density for that region, okay, which would consist of those wildlife management units in the region. If we are right, and we'll be taking a look at the data to see if our numbers agree with what we had estimated pre-hunt populations to be, you can see that we probably are moving somewhere in middle or below of our targets for that part of the state. In the mountains, we were estimating, our estimates for 2011 were that we were really at the bottom of our deer density range for that. And so again, if those numbers come out to be valid through our analysis, then we probably need to start thinking about allowing for population increases to be within that targeted range. In the Lake Plains, you'll see that we have had several years of trying to get the deer pop density down. Again, we're probably below the optimum part of that range, and we'll be looking at that as well. And the last one is the western foothills, which is really a challenging one. Deer densities were quite high in 08, and they've been coming down, and it shows us still potentially above our target for that. And we're going to need to take a good hard look at that and see, compare it with some of our sighting rates and whether in fact these density objectives are appropriate or not. For those of us looking forward to 2012 deer season, book your calendars for October 6th to 28th for archery, and then youth in November 3rd and 4th, and rifle 10th through 25th. And with that, I'll close, and what we'll do is open up the floor for questions and comments.
Right.
And if we would, if you would help us out by stating your name, the town you're in, so we can relate the kind of comments you offer to where you might be offering them. Joel Flewelling here will walk around with the mic so that the people who are watching online can hear your questions and your comments, okay? Again, please remember that there are other people watching live online, and we want to have all of our comments with respect, and I appreciate that. Thank you. So all you need to do is raise your hands and we'll call on you.
Speak for Adam. Gotta be that close. Make me nervous. Couple things here. Number one, I'd like to eliminate all check-in stations. That's my proposal. I'd like to have it go on a call-in system. I believe that's going to help you out a lot because the last day of the season, at like 10 o'clock, whatever day you're going to pick, you're going to have all your numbers that you had for the whole season, instead of letting all these numbers trickle in through the whole year. That's going to benefit everybody. And number two, just as important, muzzleloading season, that's when we're projected to kill most of our does, try to kill a lot of our does. Why do we kill our does then? I don't understand that. That should be the first season shot. Kill the deer is just like a farmer. Farmer's got 100 deer that he can feed. He's got 120 in 3 deer. He can wait till March, kill those 20 deer, those 20 cattle off. He's going to kill them at the beginning of the season. That's what I got.
Good.
I'd really like to see that change.
Thank you.
I'm Ken Jones from Proctor. What I'm seeing here is densities are pretty good, except for our Western Plains areas. So now that we're there with densities, we should start working on ratio. Cut us to 1 buck for a while, kill some more does. As a hunter, I want to see it get better out there, more activity. These bucks are still laying up with the does and you can't move them. So we should work on getting our buck population up so we're a little more even. That's what I'd like to see.
Chris Holsworth from Castleton. Along Ken's lines, why not allow us to choose, give us 1 deer to shoot during rifle season? I hunt K1 and K2, and the area that I hunt in K1 is probably 20 to 1 doe to buck. I would much rather shoot a doe out of there and get the ratio down, closer to where I think it should be. Let me shoot 1 during rifle season. I can't shoot a buck then, but I don't need to shoot a buck where I'm hunting in K1. K2 is actually a different story. That's a 6 or 7 to 1 ratio. And I've taken a deer every year for many years, so I'm out there a lot. And just between K1 and K2, I see such a big difference in buck to doe ratios on the areas that I hunt.
So Chris, are you referring to muzzleloader season?
No, rifle season.
Rifle season.
Rifle season. There are people who are opposed to shooting does. They would have the opportunity not to shoot a doe. They can still go after their bucks.
Yeah, they shouldn't be shooting those does then. That's what's confusing about them. Rifle season being buck only.
But why does it have to be?
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Again, shoot the does earlier. It's a little bit earlier than muzzleloader, but it goes to this gentleman's comments as well. Get them out of the system earlier when they're just being bred, not after they're bred.
Others? Comments? I think it's really helpful for us to hear what you guys saw out there in the woods last year and this winter.
George Harris. I was wondering on that survey, how many how many people turned back in that they weren't hunting anymore?
Yeah, 21% of our respondents said they did not hunt in the rifle season. Yeah, thanks. Good question.
Jim Harrington up in Leicester. Curiosity what the state feels in previous years in yarding areas. I've seen tons of deer, especially this time of the year. This season I didn't see that. I went up into our camp area last season, this time I see 30, 40 deer. This year I'm seeing 6. Do you think it's because of their behavior because of the winter?
Absolutely. For white-tailed deer, the wintering area is really just a thermal protection from the elements. Lower snow depths, there's less food to eat there. They really don't want to go there unless they have to. And even for someone like me, I was telling people that live at about 2,000 feet, there were deer in the woods all winter long. They did not want to go to that deer yard if they didn't have to. And so this was one of the great winters where they were able to browse pretty much widely distributed throughout their range, much of their range. And that's why. Yep.
Fred Bradley and Middletown Springs, but hunt Northeast Kingdom in the area of where West Mountain Management Unit is. Do you have a plan for what is going to be done with Wenlock, the properties around there that the state, as well as the actual conservation area down the bottom?
Well, I know, thanks Fred, I know that there is a requirement to update the West Mountain Wildlife Management Area plan. I also know that a plan for Bill Sladek area, Wildlife Management Area, is of great interest, but I'm not aware, I don't know, Commissioner, if there's any action on Wenlock Wildlife Management Area. Would that be part of the West Mountains?
No, it would be considered at a different time, but you're absolutely right. There'll be, folks pay attention, there'll be a comment period coming up, hopefully from the next year or two, about what's going on in West Mountain. I will say that, you know, as far as keeping up with the plan, all of the proposed logging has been executed and done. So, you know, the next phase of you know, what will happen up there will be a part of that plan.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Vicki Bellafato, I hunt Wind Hull area, and I'm actually responding to the gentleman from Danby who asked about the hunters that didn't hunt. Is it because they're going out of state? Or, I mean, like in Wind Hull, I got to tell you, we hunted. I saw 2 deer my whole season. I went to Ohio, I went to New York. New York, I saw 15 in 2 days. So, I mean, I know a lot of you guys are hunting other areas that have good ratios, but we're in an area that has nothing.
That's a very good question. And the challenge of our deer hunter survey, when I say it's a deer hunter survey, it's a general hunting license survey. And so we don't really know when those people are randomly drawn that they're in fact deer hunters. But over the past couple of years, there's enough potential transition in what people hunt, you know, which seasons they hunt, that I do think the Fish and Wildlife Department needs to get a better handle on the archery hunters, the rifle hunters, the muzzleloader hunters, and who's doing what and who's not doing what. So it's a fair question, and unfortunately that survey that I talked about really doesn't get at it as much as it should.
Dick Barker, I live in Hubbardton, born in Hubbardton. I've hunted this area since I was 15. This year I see 1 deer. That was a little fawn on the way home, the last day of deer season. She was standing inside the road. Couldn't even find a deer track up around my deer camp. It's a big joke. The deer tags for the doe are tailgate tags, they call them. Shoot a deer, throw it in a bag, tag it. Bring it home, nobody stop you, take the tag off, the deer will go again. Now, there's no doe in Hubbardton where I hunted. I see that 1 deer, I hunted. No deer. No doe, no buck, 1 little fawn. There's a doe around there somewhere as if she hadn't got shot. I imagine she got shot. So there ought to be something done with this doe hunting. And I think there's too many doe shot through muzzle loading, bow hunting, and all your other doe seasons. I think for at least 5 years to get this deer herd back again, you need 1 deer. You get as many licenses you want, you shoot 1 deer and you're done. And I imagine some of these guys in here have seen it, but there's some people who haven't. When I went deer hunting when I was a kid, if you didn't see 15 deer the first morning, you had a bad morning. Now, you'll never see that now. But the guns, the bows, the muzzle loaders, everything is better, except the deer herd and taking care of the deer. There's no feed for them. They don't have the farms, and they can't shoot all the doe.
Thank you very much. We selected Joel because he was one of our best joggers and runners.
Rick Grabowski, Hubbardton. In answer to your hunting license problem, why don't you break it down to small game and large game? You can keep the feed the same. It's just that if you buy a small game, that's all you hunt, is rabbit, squirrel, etc. Then you can buy a deer tag if you want a deer hunt, or a bear tag if you want a bear hunt, and then, of course, archery and muzzleloader goes along with it. And that way there you could collect data as to who's hunting what, and according to your license sales.
Good.
Great, thank you.
Kevin Camara, I hunt mostly in the Timoth area. And like this last year is the worst deer season I've ever seen. And I think a lot of it has to do with open land versus non-open land too. And the amount of antlerless permits that were issued in 2009 and 2010. The open land got hit hard with antlerless hunting, I believe. I've seen apples that used to be gobbled up every night in the morning, where apples are just on the ground for weeks and weeks during deer season and not eaten. Beech nuts all over the ground, no deer eating the beech nuts. Very few deer seen this year. It was the worst year I've ever seen. Can you explain why, and you blame a lot of it on the winter severity of 2010, yet New Hampshire had a 15% increase in deer kill, and they had the exact same winter as we did. I think we need to not blame it all on that winter season and blame a lot of it on the number of doe permits that were issued for muzzleloading in 2009 and 2010.
Right. Fair question. And don't, I hope I have not suggested that the permit numbers in previous years don't influence deer densities in the future, because they do. What you had in New Hampshire was interesting when that was first identified, is you've got a very different, they're at a very different stage in their deer herd. Their deer herd are really going down, and now they're just beginning to climb up. And one of the things New Hampshire had for it, and we spoke to their biologist about it, is they were actually behind in their harvest until that snow came, which came too late for us in Vermont. Our season was closed, but theirs was still open, and they were able to harvest deer very successfully under that snow. So keep in mind, we still have deer densities that New Hampshire does not have. But they're just basically, we're at different stages, and that's why we had a discrepancy in that kill. And a lot of last year's kill, the change in the kill was certainly the winter, but it was also, you're right, the accumulation of the antlerless permit levels that really simply were assigned to take antlerless deer without knowing what kind of winter we were going to have. And that is the challenge of a deer biologist is, okay, I got to try to balance this deer herd, and then after the fact, I got to deal with what Mother Nature gives me.
The other thing to realize is a lot of us hunters are locked into very little open land that we can run. The land is not posted. So when you have those big numbers of antlerless permits, those open lands get hit real hard.
And you don't have a bigger friend than Commissioner Barry at the helm here, who's very interested in addressing this issue of open lands and hunter access, because not only is it important for our ability to manage a deer herd, it's hard to manage a deer herd if in fact what's happening is what you just described. You're only managing a portion of the deer herd on a portion of its range. But it also addresses some of the concerns about deer damage to forest regeneration. It's hard to tackle that without also dealing with hunter access as well. So very good comments, thank you.
Ron Adams, Fairhaven. I hunt public land in 3 different states. I hunt basically no private land. Anybody that knows me, I do a lot of hunting up at Half Moon State Park. I have for my whole life, that area. My concern is these antlerless permits. You go up there opening weekend of deer season in 2010 and 11 from the Glen Lake boat access to the Reagan Meadows. Anybody that knows that area, there was 6 or 7 vehicles there. Opening day of muzzleloader, both years, there were 15 plus vehicles. Now I've had 2 acquaintances, friends of mine, that admitted to me they have access all deer season, archery and rifle, to private posted land more in the western part of Rutland County. But when it comes to shooting their doe, they're going to run to the state park, because I'm not going to shoot a doe where I hunt my buck. I've had them admit it to me. You have with this gentleman's comment, your public lands are getting hammered, not only by us guys that hunt just that, but you have people with private posted someplace else to shoot their doe. And I've got one other comment to make. And nobody in the departments have convinced me over the years. As a taxpayer for many years in the state, I still truly believe you're looking at the revenue that you bring in through fees, licenses, and mainly antlerless permits to balance your budget. We need X number of dollars. We've got to get rid of so many doe permits. Now you want to start another bear license, $5. There's other ways to do it than to keep charging fees. If you need more money, then go back to the legislature. Be upfront with it. But I am still convinced that Fish and Game is still trying to balance their books by how many doe permits they can give out. Can we put a few more in this zone, a few more in that zone? Fellas, we need another $100,000. Stop. Convince us that you aren't doing that. I say you've done it for years.
Commissioner,
so I may not convince you, sir, and I appreciate your comments. And back before I was in the department, I didn't know one thing. But to give you an indication that we did exactly what you suggested. In 2010, we had 26,000 some odd animal permits. 2011, we dropped it down to about 9,000. And I had to go to the legislature and get $1.2 million in budget adjustment and $2.4 million for 2013 because we don't do that, because we take the data that we're given. And so, maybe it's a little too late to convince you, but per your recommendation, that's exactly what we did. We dropped those animal permits by 63%. And then I went to the legislature on my hands and knees, and God bless them, they know that sportsmen matter and they're going to come through. But we did exactly as you recommended. I just want, it probably doesn't show up in the news, but that's exactly where we're at right now.
Did they give you money last year?
Hardly any. Not last year they didn't.
Then I suggest these people in this room talk to your legislators. Otherwise, you're not going to have any deer left. By the way, I saw 4 deer between archery and rifle, and I gave New York up, and Brian Ames is a witness to that. He didn't see me in New York this year. I hunted exclusively for Vermont. My solution, I'm going back to New York this year.
thanks, Ron.
Me too.
Yeah, my name's Don Chaffee. I'm from Rutland Town. My comments will probably duplicate some of the others here, but for Adam's benefit, welcome Adam to the state. I think you'll find, not only in the state, but especially here in Rutland County, sportsmen that are willing to talk to you because you're willing to listen to them. And I find that a refreshing approach that you have. It shouldn't be lost on you or the department that in this room right here, there's literally thousands of years of experience in the woods of the state of Vermont. I have 55 years of hunting experience, and that's experience with habitat, terrain, feeding patterns, movement patterns, and all species of game. And that should be considered impressive to the department when looking at sportsmen. Now some comments of concern. First of all, I'd like to compliment Commissioner Berry on his analysis of the past season and the prospects for the next season. The Winter Severity Index is probably the prime factor, and also, as this gentleman said, maybe a few more antlerless permits than should have been given in the previous year led to that poor season, but that's to be predicted. I mean, I think most logical people could assume that it would be low. And also, as Commissioner Berry said in his previous remarks this last week, this season certainly will be considered to be a good season, and I think we could all predict that there's going to be a lot of deer out there based on this winter. I actually didn't come here alone tonight. I came with a petition which I wanted to present, so there's an additional 100 people in the room. And I I started this to give some input to the department so they can have some names and also some comments for people that might not have been able to make it. And the petition says that we, the undersigned, being voters and licensed sports people of the state of Vermont and supporters of the spike horn ban that's now in place, do hereby petition our Fish and Wildlife Department, our Commissioner, Fish and Wildlife Board, and our Governor to refrain from making any changes whatsoever to the present ban on shooting spike horn bucks for at least 3 years, and then only if there are demonstrated and widespread provable and recorded negative impacts on our state deer herd, and that those negative impacts are directly related to the ban. We are further of the belief that our herd has improved in both weight and antler size and number of points, and that fluctuations in herd size are directly related mostly to severity of winter and availability and quantity of habitat and forage. And there's 105 names on the petition. So that being the case, I'll submit that. That's my first recommendation. Don't change the spike horn rule in this state. It's working, and it needs even more time to work, as Pennsylvania found out when they started that they needed at least 10 years to evaluate the success of their goals in that program. And we'll get results that are quantifiable. Second, if you really want to maximize sportsman input, I really believe you ought to listen to the many who have advocated over a number of years that you do surveying on various issues that you want input on every year with applications for licenses, and that you do a prepaid survey, and that way there you would get surveys from all classes of your sportsmen that are buying licenses, and you'd have much more data, much more information than you can get from these hearings or from targeted surveys. That would be the maximum range of users possible. And it really begs the question as to why you don't do that. I'll stick another comment in here to the Commissioner's comments about seeking money from the legislature and this gentleman's suggestion that we do so. That's a two-edged sword. The more money that's sought from the legislature as opposed to coming from the hunting public, then the more influence the legislature per se generally is going to have in the development, control, and direction of our Fish and Wildlife Department. And I don't know as that's a good thing in the long run. You have a tremendous influence of non-game participants in our resource usage in this state. If they're allowed to have an undue influence on the sporting community of the state, I don't believe that's good for the sportsman. I think there needs to be a balance. And that's a touchy thing for the Commissioner to deal with in terms of what kind of a balance you achieve. But the more legislative money you get, the more legislative influence you're going to get. Third, whatever happened to the really good proposal that we had to have a doe harvest with an early muzzleloader season? Everyone in this room knows that that was basically a really good proposal, and that the only thing that really needed to be done was to be tweaking the dates and possibly putting some salve on the wounds to the bow hunters. But I don't know as we really needed to give that much deference to the bow hunters. I think we really should do it, and I agree with the other comments here this evening that the smartest thing that we could do in terms of the doe control would be to do it earlier. Whatever we do, we should do it earlier. That would have a tremendous positive impact on the available forage for the existing deer. You got a whole mess of deer out there that are just, they're consuming available forage, and then they're being shot after they're being bred, and the bucks are pursuing these does that they wouldn't necessarily need to pursue if they were called earlier. We got to stop using excuses about interference with the bow season and just find the dates and revisit that program, because it really needs to be done earlier. And I might add that the influence of the bow hunters in particular, maybe it's just R&L Archery, that's the only one I ever see mentioned, but they're a supporter of the department, I know, with this petition for crossbow, is again a little more undue influence of the bow hunter on our seasons as opposed to the muzzleloader hunter, which was the proposal that you made last year. And I really think it was a good proposal and that it should come back. Fourth, it's way past time for the department to push for a non-game fee and permit to be required of all those quiet users of our resources. Tubers, kayakers, bikers, canoeists, hikers, etc. It's way past time for all to pay their fair share for enforcement improvement and all services required to maintain our sporting resources. We license holders, some of us anyway, are sick and tired of carrying the load for those who want all kinds of input and control but want to pay nothing to use the resource. This is just an issue of basic fairness. A non-game access fee of, say, $25 a year would be very appropriate and would help us all out and would help your budget in these times. And it would be fairly easy to implement, really.
Okay.
I've long been a supporter. Pardon me?
Can you move us along?
Yes,
We're almost done, bud?
I've long been a supporter. I've long been a supporter of our youth season, okay, and the goals that the youth season represents. But I felt for a long time that we have overdone a good thing. With a resource that can be as fragile in terms of numbers in severe winters, I don't find it necessary for any youth to have to repeat his or her success 4, 5, or 6 times in order to be committed to the sport of deer hunting. I believe once a youth is successful in the program, they should follow the adult rules for the rest of the seasons.
Thank you, Don. Don, I think Commissioner Berry was itchy to respond to, I think, the survey issue.
There's a lot to chew on there. Don, just a couple quick things. As far as the user fees for other users, I completely agree. And my staff knows, and the governor knows, and the legislature knows when I had a chance to talk about user fees for non-hunting community, whether it's came to a head over access areas where we had to fend off, wouldn't believe in the legislature, all kinds of user groups. And I said, well, that's fine, and it's high time everybody paid into the system. And so we're trying to move that down the field. Same thing with wildlife management areas. We all paid for them dating back to 1937 through all the federal funds that helped pay for those programs. You want to park there and walk your dog, we would love to have you as fellow Vermonters. But, you know, maybe a parking sticker or something like that would be a good idea. So we're sorting through all those issues, and I think that there's some traction. Legislatively, I feel like there's some traction on some of the issues, including also some of the access area issues. But the one quick comment I wanted to respond to directly, only because this is coming soon to a licensing agent near you. The survey and data information is tough for us to get because we're stuck in this old school paper licensing system with tags, right? Most states are moving quickly or already have completely implemented what's called a point-of-sale licensing system where everything's done electronically. Don't worry, you don't have to have a computer, but the licensing agents will have data. I mean, right now, we're still trying to get the last reports in for big game from some of the licensing agents, and we don't have a mechanism to ask some simple questions that other folks have brought up, like you asked about out-of-state hunters, and so hopefully within a couple of years, we've already got a pilot going. Will be fully electronic, where you report your big game animal and it instantly goes to the department. When you get your license, if there's a couple key questions we'd like to ask you, right then and there when you get it every year, we'll have all that information electronically. So, I mean, I'm not much for updated technology, but I think this is the right way to go, and you guys are going to have to, help your friends and neighbors realize this is a good direction ahead to get data, to get information that you're talking about, but we don't have capacity.
Well, a good follow-up to that, Commissioner, would be, and you have a good website, you have a good online system, at least for those of us who do have computers, is to do online surveys and have people give input on the online surveys. That could be an ongoing thing where there would be a dialogue and a continuing dialogue between the sportsmen and the state online.
All right, very good. I think we'll be able to follow up with that after the meeting. Are there other people who have not spoken who would like to?
Yes.
Paulie Torrey, Pittsburgh. I was wondering, with the loss of habitat on public land, is there any way of judging how much good the food plots are benefiting the deer herd on private land?
Good, good question. Well, a couple of things. One, if you open up Sunday's Rutland Herald, I think you'll see an article about the Green Mountain National Forest beginning to become more active in timber sale. And that's a good thing, and I hope that we'll show them some positive reaction and responses to that. As far as the issue of food plots and whether we can study the benefits of that, that's a very good question. There is, to some degree, interest in the role of food plots, even in trying to reduce forest, the damage by deer on native forest regeneration. Whether we can embark on a scientific study to determine that, I don't know. But I am told that there is an increasing use and availability of food plots across Vermont, and that perhaps that may begin to have some influence. We'll see.
I'm here.
Oh, sorry.
Bill Giotti from Mount Tabor. I'm going to try and touch base on a few things, but one of the things I'd like to see from our new biologist is some information through the years on fawn recruitment, any effect the bear having as far as predators on fawns go, and with the coyotes, that type of information. I know we haven't been doing it, and it's probably a big step, but it would be nice to see us move in that direction, which kind of leads me to how antiquated the whole system seems to be, which the commissioner understands. We've had that conversation, and I know we're moving towards trying to do the point of sales, but to the fact that licenses haven't been accounted for the past year. You don't even have all those numbers in at this point in time. It's 2012. So we need to get going on that, and I think that would lead to when you do this and we sit here and look at these numbers, maybe if we were a little more up to speed and in the 21st century, we'd have a little better feeling, about what we were being told. One of the things that is the youth weekend where you're getting that data from, and that may be the best that you guys can do right now. So that's the best way you can get that information. It doesn't mean that that's the best way to figure out what's going on in the state. That just means that's the best way that we're doing it. You understand what I'm saying? So that's what hopefully this young man is going to be here for a long time and still has a full head of hair in a couple of years. And in doing so, back on the food plot, has there been any talk about doing trail cameras? Everybody's got a camera. And if the state doesn't have some, they should get some, but they should also use us and somehow set up a program where you can get that information on, getting the camera surveys from around the state from guys that are doing it every day. That's an opportunity for the department. So something to think about.
Great.
Just one more thing, I have to throw this out here because this is killing me. In your bullet point here on the reasons why or what to do about the browse situation, there was no mention of the National Forest Service on that. And when you show you're the state of Vermont, we've got that long line, that brown line comes right through the middle of the state. Well, we all know what that land is. And we know it's called the mountains, but we know it's a national forest. And we all know that those trees are 80 and 100 years old. We saw the little article in the Rutland Herald the other day of the good work they're doing on one spot. We've let out-of-state interests take over, and now people are starting to complain that are trying to grow a tree on their property and can't do it because that's the only one that's growing, and that's the one the deer are eating. Go to the national forest, walk that land. You can see how desperate the situation has become as far as a healthy forest and a forest that can sustain wildlife. They call it wilderness. That's the biggest joke out there. But we've all sat here, that everybody has to step up. Obviously us, the timber industry, and put some pressure on the right people to start getting something done, hopefully in my lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to slide on over. Or we should have done the mosh pit thing.
Hi, I'm Eric Hansen from Pittsford. I'm a forester here in Rutland County, and I've had the opportunity to walk a lot of properties over the last 4.5 years since I've been in the position. I work for the state as well. I'm not here as a state employee tonight, just a person. But I want to just reiterate some of the things that Scott and a few of the other people have mentioned here tonight. Almost all of the woodlots that I visit have a real problem with regeneration, as far as being able to regenerate species that we want to continue to grow in our forest to be able to continue to manage them. Just a quick story, 22-acre clear cut we did in West Rutland a few years ago. I walked in there last week, and what is coming back is blackberry, raspberry, beech, and hardhack. Almost all the ash, almost all the oak, almost all the sugar maple, 22 acres is browsed. Now, I'm not a deer biologist, and I don't know what the carrying capacities are, but what I do know is that in certain sections, there are just too many deer. And like I said, I don't know what to do about that. The other thing is, and I'm glad it's been brought up a couple of times, but as far as the National Forest Service goes, and Scott mentioned there will be an article in the Herald, but they are ramping up their timber harvesting program again, which is a really good thing. And you know, part of their problem is that they're so hamstrung by that whole NEPA process, and there is some wilderness out there, but they are working on an increase in the timber program, which is a really good thing.
Great. Thanks, Eric.
Jim Morey, I'm from Wyndham. I'm always interested to hear the comments from our friends in the forestry industry. I think the important thing to remember, and I'm old enough to remember the 60s when we had 15, 20 deer in every large field, and we had 250,000 deer in the state, and we'd go out and hunt for 2 weeks and see deer. And I think the crowd tonight's been very patient and very polite, and I'm very happy to see that. But I'm talking to an awful lot of people that are hunting all season and seeing 1 or 2 deer. There were 7 deer harvested in the town of Wyndham last year. So if we've got 12 per square mile, I really don't know where they are. I got one of the 7, by the way. I feel sorry for the folks that work in this department because you get a lot of pressure from all angles. And Adam, welcome on board. Good luck. But the part of the pressure is definitely from the forestry lobby. And what we've got to be very aware of is the fact that if we don't start getting some cutting done out there and start reducing some of the mature trees, we're not going to have the habitat for deer, and there will be an endless conflict between the foresters, who may not be the forest landowners, Scott, by the way. You said that in your comment about the Browse study, that this was the opinion of the foresters and the forest landowners. If you look at every study that's ever been done of forest landowners, they place wildlife in a much higher priority than forest products. So we really need to be thinking about what we can do to encourage landowners to do more cutting. And 80% of Vermont's forest land is privately owned. So the National Forest isn't going to save us, and the state wildlife areas are not going to save us. And if we really want to do something to get deer back the way they are, we've got to educate landowners that it's okay to do patch cuts and clear cuts. And as we're talking about reforming current use, I would suggest we put all the pressure we can on the government to look at current use as also requiring wildlife habitat work. We're spending $45 million a year in tax money on 2 million acres on 1/3 of Vermont to encourage not having wildlife habitat, to encourage mature forest growth for the forest lobby. So we need to get out there as sportsmen and organize and push our side of the issue. those charts are exactly correct. There are no samplings because there is no cutting. We're doing single selective cut and group cuts. We're not creating openings. Massachusetts has a part of their current use that is specifically just for open and recreational land on 5 acres. We should look at that and we should emulate it. We're going to have to change the habitat before we start to satisfy everybody. That's my opinion.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Then you'll be next. Thanks.
I'm Mike Candy from Mendon and Proctor, and I want to thank the department, first of all, for letting us have this opportunity to speak our piece. And I want to continue on with what this gentleman just said. I really personally feel we have an epidemic proportion of posted land in the state of Vermont. And number one, I'd like to see the current use definitions tightened up for strictly agriculture. Let's say Scott Darling is an emu farmer. I have no problem with that. But Scott Darling needs to pay his full boat on his property taxes. I don't need to help Scott. But if you're truly an agricultural definition, and I was hoping Representative Helm or Canfield were here tonight. They usually show up, but maybe to hear some of this. But turn the coin on the other side, and for the people, the landowners that are probably in the small minority that don't post their land, use some of that current use money that's getting pulled back from gentleman farmers, that I call them. I have another name, but I know we're on family TV tonight, so we can't use that. And put that toward the landowner that keeps their land open for the sportsmen to use. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Right up here, Joel.
Peter Young from Orwell. I'm hearing that our forests are overgrown and we need to cut them down. Is there any program to help people like me who have a number of acres of open land that want to plant something to feed the deer herd, to improve the protein, whatever? And it's not just the fruit plot that I hunt over. I want to help out the deer herd in the area.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is, let's see if I can get this right, and Eric may be able to help me on this one. There, as I understand, was a Wildlife Habitat Incentive Program. It's now part of the WHIP, Eric. Is that correct? Which, WHIP still exists? Okay. There's a program to allow certain practices to improve habitat for wildlife. And those programs change over time based on the priorities of really the parties, the partners on that program. And I can't speak to the specific programs out there now, Eric. If you would be willing to, that would be great.
What Scott's talking about is a program through the Natural Resources Conservation Service. It's a branch of the USDA, and there are, do I do that all over again? All right. Thank you, Don. There are people out of Rutland that can help you out with that. And if anybody is interested in finding out more about that, I actually can stick around a little bit afterwards and you can come talk to me. I'll give you their names and information. But they have a variety of programs, including patch cutting of 2 acres or more, that they help cost share for landowners to develop those practices specifically for wildlife. I'll be here.
Right. Thanks, Eric. Thank you, sir.
Keith Armstrong, Pownell. I noticed in our rules and regulations that wolves and mountain lions are protected. There's no open season. I wasn't really aware that they were even in the state. But then this fall, over in Somerset, where it's one of the lowest deer populations in the whole state, a friend of mine come upon a vehicle from Montana and some people from your department, and they asked him what was going on. There was a cage in the vehicle from Montana. And they said, they responded to him, "You don't ask and we don't tell. So I want you to tell us what was going on."
Sure. That's easy. There's a study going on with on black bears and the Searsburg, the Deerfield Wind Turbine Project. And so the consultants have someone from Montana who comes to Vermont and will come again probably in the next 3 weeks or so to capture bears and put radio collars on the bears so we can study the effects of wind energy facilities on black bear populations. I'm disappointed that they said what they said to you, Keith, but that's what's happening there.
They would respond that
right,
way if it was only black bears.
Thanks.
I'm Ben Siemens. I hunt in Middletown Springs. You guys here talking about youth hunting. Youth hunters, they have an opportunity to hunt deer alone without any other pressure from any hunters. There's not a lot of them there, so they can harvest a deer. And also with the doe killing, if you kill the does, you're not going to have as many bucks, and if you kill the does, the deer population will decrease. You're not going to have the does that you kill even to kill. So.
Thank you. A couple more, and we'll wrap it up. Yes, Fred.
Fred, Middletown Springs, Fred Riley, Middletown Springs. I'd like to kind of follow up on this regarding bear and predators for fawns.
Could you speak a little louder?
I'm sorry.
Taking that up, Fred.
I would like to have a little bit more feedback regarding, from the people here, regarding their feelings on bear predation regarding fawns and the effect, especially in big country. Adirondacks, where I hunt, Northeast Kingdom, I saw a tremendous amount of bear just activity, and there were deer. And not that, but the question is, over time, have bear become educated springtime, get into behind a doe in having the fawn, and essentially eating it when it is delivered. The question is, if you have a higher bear population, which is increasing all around the state, and this could be a two-edged sword that's just going to be worse and worse.
Right.
More bear, less deer, less deer.
What I can say, Fred, is I don't have the understanding of the literature on it, but I can tell you that the thinking is that, in fact, black bear populations, as they have grown throughout the northeastern U.S., there's an increasing concern, and there's more information that suggests they can be effective predators of white-tailed deer, particularly fawns. And it is something that we need to put into our management scenario. And I'm not sure that's really driving our population goal for black bears, but clearly, again, our bear population has doubled in a very short amount of time, and our bear management program really now is directed at stabilizing that growth. We're at the peak of what we think we should have, and what Vermonters would prefer to have for bear populations in Vermont. Okay.
Scott, one more thing. I just want to ask everybody a favor here. I didn't realize until I started doing what I'm doing now what a problem it is out there with poaching. And our wardens do the very best they can, but they can only be in so many places at once. And the work that they do is complaint-driven, which means that somebody's got to call them when they think something's going on. And it's become really frustrating for the honest guys out there. And I just want to encourage everybody to do what you can. You're not a snitch. You're helping out wildlife. You're helping out yourself. That, spotlight in the middle of the field in the middle of the night, probably worth giving a call to the game warden. Whether it's fishing or hunting or whatever it is, please do your part to help us out. Call those wardens. Actually, by the door here, we've got thank you very much, we've got bumper stickers, which you could grab one on your way out, put it on your truck, memorize the phone number, 1-800-75-ALERT. I just want to put that plug in, because it affects all of us, and we really need your help with that. So, Scott, back to you.
All right. Well, thank you. I want to thank the board members for coming, the department employees. I want to thank the people who watched online, and I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. Feel free to stop by and introduce yourself to Adam. Thank you very much. Hey, that's